think I'm big meat, Larry Hoover, with the work. Hallelujah. One nation.
How many murders do you think Larry Hoover is responsible for? That's question number 1. Is he responsible for the death of the founder of the Outlaw gangster disciples, Charles Big Chuck Dorsey, in January 1996? That's question number 2. And the third question that we'll pose on today's show is, why did the murder of a Cabrini Green legend cause the gangster disciples in Newtown, which is on the other side of the city, to flip to beaties? Well, let me answer the third question first, because it's the easiest. The murder of Big Chuck Dorsey had absolutely nothing to do with Newtown switching sides and flipping to black disciples. Big Chuck from Cabrini Green is a different person than Little Chuck from Newtown, who was running the GD's drug operation out of the Wentworth Garden projects on the low end in the 1990s. Look at the pictures of Big Chuck and Little Chuck back to back. Notice anything? Big Chuck Dorsey from Cabrini Green was called Big for a reason, and Little Chuck from the low end was called Little for a reason. Now, let me clear up the rumor that Big Chuck was a founding member of the Insane Gangster Disciples before I set the scene for his murder, and then we'll go through the court paperwork so you can decide for yourself whether Larry Hoover is responsible for his death. The Insane Gangster Disciples were founded in the Cabrini Green projects in the 1970s. Folks from that era were Big Chuck's big homies when he was a shorty. For his part, Big Chuck was in fact an insane GD growing up, wilding out in the 1980s, with his homeboys known as the Crazy Crew. In the early 1990s, Larry Hoover was making moves in the hopes of securing his early release from prison, while Big Chuck Dorsey ran a drug dealing operation so big that, I guess, he probably thought he was Big Meech, or Larry Hoover, and that he was above the chairman's laws. So, he formed an outlaw set of GDs in Cabrini Green, fought a civil war against other GDs, and continued fighting vice lords and cobras until the shocking death of 7-year-old Dan Trail Davis while walking to school with his mother by sniper fire in 1992. As a result of the media backlash and citywide shock at the senseless death of a child, Chairman Larry Hoover and other gang leaders forced all of the warring parties to make a peace treaty that was short-lived as a citywide effort, but actually lasted for a couple of years in Cabrini Green. Hoover and Big Chuck agreed that he would return to order under GD laws and reclaim his seat as a board member. In the fall of 1993, Larry Hoover gave a pre-recorded speech to a picnic gathering of some 10,000 GD members and supporters in rural Kankakee County. He used his influence with gang members to back a citywide gang peace summit in October 1993, as well as a range of community programs. At parole hearings in 1993 and 95, Hoover won endorsements from several prominent Chicagoans, including former mayor Eugene Sawyer, academics, social workers, and ministers. In 1995, Chuck Dorsey was the highest-ranking GD left standing on the streets, after Chairman Hoover was arrested on federal RICO charges, while already serving a 150-year sentence on a state murder case, and 38 other high-ranking GDs were swept off of the streets of Chicago in a wide-ranging indictment that puts the O-Block RICO case to shame.
According to a Chicago Tribune article originally published on January 10, 1996, Charles Big Chuck Dorsey was in a lucrative but dangerous business. As the leader of the Gangster Disciples street gang in Cabrini Green, Dorsey, 26, had controlled the drug trade in the North Side public housing development for the last 4 or 5 years, according to family members and police. During that time, Dorsey, who earned his nickname because of his 6-foot-tall, 336-pound frame, had suffered gunshot wounds 4 or 5 times. He always said that he was terrified they were going to come at him someday, said Annika Walker, Dorsey's girlfriend of 8 years. He always told me he was going to resign because he couldn't deal with it. But Dorsey didn't resign, and his lifestyle caught up with him Monday afternoon. He had stopped at Ruby's Lounge and Liquors, 4458 West Harrison Street, about 2 p.m., to check on the progress of the tavern's renovation, authorities said. Dorsey had purchased the bar about 6 months ago as an investment for his 3 children, and because he wanted to do something different with his life, Walker said. When he realized that the round-the-clock security that was supposed to be in place at the bar was lacking, he called his family to express concern, said police and his sister, Onita Dorsey. But a short time later, Two masked men carrying handguns kicked in a side door of the bar, said Commander Donald Hilbring of the Chicago Police Department's Gang Investigation Unit. Hilbring said the intruders looked over the construction workers working on the bar, apparently searching for Dorsey. Dorsey got up from a chair, walked up to one of the intruders, and wrapped him in a bear hug, Hilbring said. During the subsequent struggle, Dorsey was shot and fell to the floor. The gunman shot him 7 more times before fleeing, Hilbring said. Although the bar is in an area controlled by the rival vice lords, Hilbring said the absence of Dorsey's normal bodyguard detail at the site led investigators to suspect he was a victim of turmoil within the Gangster Disciples in the wake of last summer's indictments of other top leaders. Marion Stamps, a Cabrini area community activist, praised Dorsey's efforts during the last 2 years to reduce the number of gang-related shootings there. "I hope whoever takes his place will be as committed to the peace process as he was," she said. "Now that we know what happened to Big Chuck, he was shot and killed by masked men when it happened, January 4th, 1996, and where it happened, a bar Big Chuck bought for himself on the west side of Chicago. Let's talk about who did it and why." A couple of months after Big Chuck was murdered, a rival GD board member named Leon Holton, aka Milkman, was killed by Vincent Galloway and Melvin Clifton on March 10, 1996. And, to find out why Galloway and Clifton did it, we need to take a look at the case titled, People of the State of Illinois vs. Clifton.
The following evidence was adduced at trial. Eddie Brown testified for the state that on March 10, 1996, he and the murder victim, Leon Holton, were driving around in Brown's car when Holton called someone on his cell phone and then said he had to go and meet someone. Brown drove Holton to 78th Street where Holton saw a maroon Oldsmobile with the person he was to meet inside. Brown honked at the car, and the two cars pulled to the side of the road, with Brown's car behind the Oldsmobile. Brown said the two men in the Olds got out of their car and approached his car. He identified, in court, the man who got out on the passenger side as Galloway, whom he knew at the time as Legs Diamond, a member of the Gangster Disciples. The man who got out on the driver's side was hopping on a crutch, and had a cast on his leg. Brown said that man entered Brown's car, and sat behind Brown in the back seat, and Galloway entered and sat in the back seat on the passenger side behind Holton. Galloway told Brown the other man's name was Melvin, and Brown identified him in court as Clifton. Brown said once the two men were in the car, he and Galloway talked about the Chicago Bulls basketball game that day. Holton then asked Clifton what was up, and Clifton said he had paged someone and was waiting for a call back on his cell phone. Brown testified further that as he was about to turn around and say something, he noticed, out of the corner of his right eye, what looked like a silver tube extension behind him, and then heard a poof sound, like a gun, with a silencer, and felt a pain in his neck, and knew he had been shot. Brown then grabbed the door handle, and as he was trying to get out of the car he felt a sharp pain in his right hip, and another in his back on the right side. Brown got out of the car, and tried to run but fell because he had been shot in the hip. As he was lying in front of his car, Brown said, he saw Galloway get out of the car on the passenger side, walk toward him and stand directly over him, pointing a gun at his head. Galloway then and there, shot Brown in the forehead and the upper right chest, and, thereupon turned to Clifton, who had exited the car, and was standing nearby, and told him he was out of bullets. Galloway and Clifton then ran to the maroon Olds, with Clifton hopping on his crutch, and the car took off. Brown stated that, he next called his sister on his cell phone, and his niece, Assunta Saddler, answered. Brown told her who had shot him and where he was, and subsequently the police and an ambulance arrived. Brown talked to a police officer while he was in the ambulance, and told him who shot him. Brown was then taken to a hospital. After Eddie Brown testified that Vincent Galloway, aka Legs Diamond, and Melvin Clifton killed Leon Holton, better known as Milkman, and also tried to kill him, prosecutors called members of the victims' families and law enforcement officials to present the government's theory on why Milkman was murdered. The state next called Thomas Richardson, a detective in the Chicago Police Department's Gang Crimes Unit who also was detailed to an ongoing federal investigation of the Gangster Disciples. Richardson's testimony corroborated that of Philander Jenkins, as to the gang's leadership hierarchy, and the August 31, 1995, federal indictments of 39 gangster disciples. Richardson also stated that Holton, the murder victim, had been a board member for 2 to 3 years prior to the August 31 indictments, and that he was elevated to that position because he was a very prosperous narcotics dealer on the South Side, and had a lot of money, and a lot of power. According to Richardson, after the 39 were indicted, Chuck Dorsey was given the okay by Gangster Disciples leader, Larry Hoover, to take control of the city for the gang. On January 4, 1996, Dorsey was shot and killed. The state's next witness, Chicago Police Detective John Hamilton, testified that on April 26, 1996, the Federal Bureau of Investigation notified him that Clifton had been taken into custody in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Hamilton and his partner, Detective Timothy Bagdon, went to Fort Wayne and talked to Clifton that evening in an office in the Allen County Jail. Upon being asked if he knew where Galloway was, Clifton said he had not seen Galloway since that date, which he explained was the day Holton was killed. Galloway was arrested in Chicago on April 30, 1996, and Hamilton said he and Bagdon spoke with him that day. After being advised of his rights, Galloway told them he was a board member with the Gangster Disciples and that he had known Clifton for several years, and they were friends. Galloway also said he knew Holton, the murder victim, but that he and Holton were not close. According to Galloway, Holton had not earned his way up through the ranks, as others in the gang had, but instead was given his position as a board member because of his money. Galloway said Holton was not well liked for that reason, and because he threw his weight around. Galloway also denied any knowledge of, or involvement in, Holton's murder. Obviously, the record is clear that Larry Hoover did not backdoor Big Chuck and order a hit on him. In fact, Larry Hoover put Big Chuck in a position to run the whole city of Chicago for the Gangster Disciples. So, does Larry Hoover bear any responsibility for his murder, anyway, since he was the leader of the GDs? And is Larry Hoover responsible for Milkman's murder? How many murders do you think Larry Hoover is responsible for? We report. You decide. Now, we just have one more question to answer in this video. Whatever happened to Little Chuck from the low end? Well, we'll let Snitches News tell you that story, but before we do, please smash that like button and subscribe to the Cartoon News Network.
Chuck was backdoor about a mile, not about a block, about a mile. He was getting too big, he was flooding Newtown, and he was young. So a lot of old people didn't like that he was young and he had all that power. Newtown was Dee Dee and became Dee Dee